And in recent diplomatic developments, the European Council President Antonio Costa has reaffirmed the European Union's unwavering support for South Africa's leadership of the G20. Costa emphasized the EU's commitment towards strengthening ties with South Africa, describing us as a reliable and predictable partner. And it comes at a time of growing tensions between the US and South Africa. Let's talk about the implications of this dynamic, and former diplomat and international public affairs and diplomacy expert, Dr. John Maré, joins me this morning. John, good morning. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. The EU Council President Antonio Costa related that call he had with Ramaphosa, in which he made a commitment towards deepening ties with South Africa. Ramaphosa, of course, reciprocating the undertaking in a post on X. Let's start by explaining to our viewers the crucial role the Council plays inside the EU in defining the political direction and the priorities of the EU, and why this public solidarity is important for South Africa.
Yes, well, the Commission of the EU is really the secretariat. It's like the public service, if I can put it in a simplistic way, for the EU. And the Council represents the member states at political level. The President of the Council for this particular interim, he's a new President, is the gentleman you mentioned, Costa of Portugal, who actually does have some Mozambican ancestry, so I presume he would be particularly interested in Africa. And the commitment coming from him should underline the commitment on the political level of the member states of the European Union, which would be then taken forward at Commission, that secretariat level, in promoting a relationship between Europe and South Africa, or Europe and Africa. And I presume also that one of the reasons he was talking to our president was because of the March, that's next month, there should be a summit between South Africa and the European Union, where our head of state, President Ramaphosa, should be in Brussels with a group of ministers, I presume, as usual is the case. And that would be back-to-back with the European Union, African Union summit, which hasn't taken place for some time. It's a little bit overdue. And so therefore, I think this is very gratifying to South Africa.
Yeah.
To get the good outreach, I should say, from the European Union at this time.
The South Africa-EU summit kicks off on the 13th of March, but our relationship goes back to the moment where the EU and South Africa concluded a trade development and cooperation agreement. This is the TDCA back in 1999. And the partnership has exponentially grown since then. Of course, John, agricultural exports are a big part of our trade deals. And I would love for you to highlight the key areas of bilateral cooperation between our two, we can't say our two countries, but our country and the entity. Yes,
I think that, the TDCA that you mentioned was really the kickoff. And I actually was deputy head of mission in Brussels at that time for South Africa. So I had a role in negotiating and creating that TDCA, which was then finalized in 2000. And that really kicked off the relationship. And the name tells a lot of things, TDCA, because it's trade, development, as well as cooperation on a variety of fronts. And that was done in parallel with other bilateral agreements, for example, on science and technology, as well as fisheries and so on. But since then, the relationship has grown in many sectors. And I think one should also look in 2013, 2014, there was the conclusion of a SADC EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement, between, not all the SADC countries, but Southern Africa, one can say, including South Africa and the EU. So therefore, really the trade dimension, which is very terribly important, the EU remains as a bloc, remains our premier investment and trade economic partner in South Africa and in most of Africa for that matter. So it is a big deal, but South Africa initially had this special relationship with the EU, and that has also since been solidified, I would say, in a strategic partnership agreement. South Africa is the only country in Africa with which the European Union has a strategic partnership. Therefore, they look to us as being the strategic partner in Africa, which is perhaps also why our summit is on the 13th of March, as you say, just before the African Union EU summit. And I think South Africa has to play this role very cautiously. We don't want to seem as if we are trying to lord it over the rest of Africa. But we do have this special relationship, which is sometimes underplayed. I'm sadly to say by South Africa, perhaps. There is opportunity. And you ask what sectors, I mean, trade is obviously tremendous. Investment is tremendous between South Africa and the European Union as a bloc. And apart from that, scientific cooperation, R&D support, tremendous. Health, education, so your social infrastructure support is also tremendous. The European Union in recent years has opened up a new program which they call the Global Gateway, which is meant to help build digital transport and energy connections between Europe and the rest of the world. Some people compare it to the Belt and Road from the Chinese, but you do have this Global Gateway where South Africa should and is already playing some kind of a role, but again, it's a little bit underplayed and it can be strengthened.
Costa highlighted the EU's commitment towards deepening ties with South Africa as a reliable and predictable partner. I think you did a great job, John, of just sketching the context in which this relationship has developed. Costa also said he looks forward to what we've just talked about now, the bilateral South Africa-EU summit on the 13th of March. He said, I express the EU's full support to South Africa's leadership of the G20 and its ambition to strengthen multilateral cooperation and the Pact for the Future to address the most pressing global issues. How important is this at a time when the US seems bent on a program to isolate South Africa, has expressed strong and uninformed views on expropriation?
Yes. Well, the US-South Africa relationship is a whole different kettle of fish that I won't go into at the moment. We don't have time. But you ask the importance of the EU commitment. I think that is particularly important at this point in time. And as you know, and as you mentioned, I think that South Africa is the president of the G20 this year. And it's the first time that any African country has had the presidency of the G20. And it's also the first year that the African Union is part of the G20. It's a member of the G20, although it's an organization, it's a bloc. The EU is also a member of the G20, although it's not it's a bloc. So therefore, this is a new dimension, because I think increasingly in recent years, more and more countries have seen the G20 as an ideal forum for interaction between what many call the global north and the global south, and it's got the 20 top economies of the world in that, and it's really an ideal catalyst for cooperation, and also the fact that some of the EU members are bilaterally are members of the G20 as well solidifies the importance of the EU in the G20, and with South Africa at this particular point in time. And I think that much can be done. There are key sectors to be developed in South Africa. The bioeconomy is something I often talk about. It has tremendous potential for Africa generally, South Africa in particularly, to develop that. And the EU is a world leader in the bioeconomy. So there's so much that can be done with partnerships, etc. I mean, forestry in Africa is one of the biosectors that has developed into a tremendous value chain, long value chain of bioproducts. And this is just one of the examples. I mean, clean energy is another one that where the EU is very, very keen on. and South Africa need, and so on. Yeah.
I mean, I think the intention with the previous question and bringing the US in was to juxtapose the strong stance that the US seems to be taking against South Africa. I know that we're making some diplomatic moves to try and neutralize the acid that exists between us. But, for countries like South Africa, on the African continent, when you have a major superpower take the direction and the route that it has, the expectation is that other powerful countries, other powerful blocs will follow suit. The EU, through the statements that they've made and the commitments that they've renewed between us and South Africa, seem to buck that expectation, or the expectation that that could be a trend that might emerge. So, how important is that, especially against the backdrop of the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, announcing he's not going to attend the G20 summit in Johannesburg. He said South Africa was also doing very, very bad things, and also falsely accused South Africa of expropriating private property without compensation.
Yes. Well, I think the summit he is referring to is the Foreign Ministers' Summit, which will take place within the 2 weeks from now of the G20. All the G20 foreign ministers will be meeting here in South Africa. There will be various other summits of different other ministers during the year. And then in the end of the year, there's supposed to be a summit of the heads of state. And hopefully relations between us and the USA would have improved, who knows, by then. However, to come back to your question, I think the world has been for a long time moving in the direction of a multipolar world, where I think everybody agrees with that. And I think if there's I don't want to call it a rift, but if there's a divergence of foreign policy perceptions and relationships between some of those poles, then the EU is one of them. The USA would be definitely one of the other ones. If there's a divergence between them vis-a-vis Africa and South Africa, I think that's to be expected in a multipolar world system. It's a pity sometimes that, of course, the transatlantic relationship has always been very solid and strong. Normally, they've always acted in concert. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean to say that they need to do that always, and there can be times, such as now, when there could be divergence. Your other Japan is in the G20. That's another major role player in the world economy and the world political scene, and hopefully increasingly so in Africa as well, etc. So we take over G20 from Brazil, which is a key member of the Global South, also in the BRICS and the IBSA relationships that we're in. And they are very much with us. They're handing over the baton of their initiatives, which were, as many would know, the bioeconomy, in fact, to us. So in fact, it is, I think it's very important that the stance of the USA and Mr. Rubio at this particular point in time is not necessarily reflected by other major partners of South Africa and other key players in the world economy.
Yeah, and that goes some way towards allaying the anxieties that a country like ours must feel on the international stage. Thank you for your time, your thoughts and your analysis, Dr. John Maré. We really do appreciate it.